I'm just going to talk about the teaching insofar as you can't find it on the website. I mean, just to give you a kind of more direct, a little bit more of a direct view. So as Vicky said, methods are a key thing, and we require you to do statistics, and we require you to do a methods course. And for the methods course, you can specialize in the second term in quantitative or qualitative methods. So you don't have to be a kind of quant geek only, but you will have to achieve a certain amount of statistics, literacy, and of quantitative skills. So you can think of this as 4 components of the degree. So the methods component is going to take roughly a quarter of your time, and that runs through Michaelmas and Hilary term. So Michaelmas you can think of 8 weeks before Christmas. Hilary you can think of 8 weeks between Christmas and New Year's, Easter rather. That would be a very short term. Between Christmas and Easter, and Trinity is everything after Easter. And Trinity, just to get that out of the way, your last term after Easter is just spent focused on research. So that's when you write your thesis, which is an original piece of work, which counts for, again, a quarter of the degree and will take up a quarter of your time, roughly. But, of course, having said that it comes right at the end, you probably want to have a pretty good idea right at the start of what you might be doing. You might even put it in your application statement, which you can then, and this question does come up, you know, if I write this for my statement, does it mean that I have to do my dissertation? Well, most of our students come in with one thing and they wind up with completely another, or many of them do. So you can throw it out the window, and some people even throw out their plans over Easter for whatever reason. You know, they've become very interested in a new thing. Right, so these 2 things are roughly a quarter each. And then what we do in Michaelmas is we have 2 courses which try to get you onto the same page. So you will be coming, and this is another question which I guess relates to admissions, you will be coming from lots of different disciplines. I mean, we've had, again, sorry to sound, I mean, we've only had the degree for 5 years, but we've seen it all. You know, we've had computer scientists, physicists, philosophers, English lit people, not just sociology and media studies, but psychology. You will come from lots of different disciplines, but we need to have some way to kind of get you into a conversation. And the way we do that is we have 2 courses, and one is the kind of survey course which I teach, which is called Social Dynamics, where you basically get the different theories, concepts, and topics in internet studies as they are at the moment. So that's the Dynamics course, which is worth roughly 1/8 of the course, and then the other 1/8 of the course is Internet Technologies and Regulations, or Tech and Reg as we call it, which is the more policy-related course, which is the course which kind of allows you to understand how the internet actually works. So it's very technical. How do domain names get allocated? What is the deep web? How do all these things that are going on with the NSA, how do they work? And so on the one side, but also issues such as law, legal issues, how is the internet governed, who polices it, how does censorship work, and so on. So those are the 2 ways, and of course those are the foci, if you like, of the degree, is that you get a good conceptual understanding on the one hand, and a very practical and policy and implications oriented one on the other. And again, you can work your way through the degree with either of these emphases. I mean, you don't have to be completely policy-oriented, but you can very much have that focus, or the opposite. And the last quarter, so I've gone through 3 quarters, so the last quarter is in Hilary, when apart from doing more methods, you kind of get more specialized after Christmas in a particular set of methods, but then you also get 2 option courses, and you get to choose any 2 from our list, and you also, if you're very heavily specialized, let's say that you're interested in how the internet is used in Eastern Europe or something like that, and you want to take a course outside of the department, then with our permission and with their permission, you can also do that. So there's in fact, the whole world's your oyster as far as kind of specializing is concerned. And here's just the list of options that we have at the moment. They very closely relate I mean, I think if you match these topics up to who's teaching them and the faculty page that you might have looked at, you'll see that this very closely corresponds to a lot of our interests. Not all of them, but many of them. So, for example, internet economics is very much, we have a specialist in that. He's very sophisticated in the way he analyzes, for example, internet auctions and how that works in terms of economic modeling. But that's just one example. So that's a very technical economic course, and then we have virtual economies themselves, for example, which just completely contrasts with that, because that's about crowdsourcing, outsourcing, how you start Bitcoin and other kind of virtual currencies. So that's much more kind of practical, business-related economics. Just to put it in shorthand, I mean, it's obviously much more sophisticated than that. But so those are the courses. So what you'll see here is that there's quite a bit of flexibility built into this. I mean, we do cover a vast range. We don't pretend, I think, to cover the whole of internet research, but we do cover quite a substantial amount. And you can specialize, but one thing to say about the course is that it's quite short. I mean, Oxford is a very intensive period of study, basically from only October, really, until when you hand your thesis in on the last day of July, which is less than a year, and we squeeze a lot into these kind of 8 or 9 week terms, but believe me, you get your money's worth, or you get to study quite a lot during those 8 weeks, and then during the holidays. So I think you can probably talk to students afterwards about this, but it's an intensive experience, but I think we cram a lot into it. I think the other thing I forgot to say is that we do examine you in different ways. So the core courses are, you basically, there are some essays that you do for them, but you get examined after Christmas. You have a paper where you answer 3 out of 10 questions in a big room. Nothing else. Just you and the 3 questions, if you like. Methods is partly examined by statistics, examined by exams. Methods is examined by essays. The option courses are all examined by essays. They really allow you to shine, to develop your interests, to write about your interests. And then the thesis is between 10 and 15,000 words, where again it's a pretty substantial piece of work. And we have a huge variety of topics. I mean, if you hang around and you can look at some of the theses, and as Vicky mentioned, they've been, a number of them have been published, which is really nice. But you really get to grapple with one particular topic, and very often it involves getting data, but sometimes it's a purely theoretical piece of work about normative issues in law. So again, they span the range. 2 years ago, I think half the theses were about Twitter, which it was the Twitter year. But that's very unusual. I mean, otherwise they really cover a lot of different ground. So I've covered the course. I've covered how to examine.
Briefly that they get to choose between quant and qualitative options in the second term.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is.
So in the second term, you'll be asked to take an advanced methods course, and you have a choice between quantitative or qualitative methods. And I say that because you hear us talking about empirical research. Empirical research isn't only quantitative research; it's also qualitative research. And I convene that course right now that helps you figure out how to interview people and do participant observation and code qualitative information and things like that. So don't think that we have a solely quantitative bias. We also have a lot of students doing qualitative work, and I think Ralph noted that we had some very strong qualitative theses last year in the submissions. So I just wanted to make sure you didn't think that empirical only meant quantitative.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the different courses and the way they're examined and so on. And just to say again, I mean, our students are very diverse. Half of them probably come directly from undergraduate, and half have worked for NGOs or worked in industry or worked in a law firm or something like that. So in that regard, it's very diverse. The destination of students, I have a rough sense now after 5 years, but again, half, I mean, it's the half and half syndrome. Half go on to further studies, and that again is in very diverse places. I mean, we've had people go to very good, particularly American universities, but also continental, everywhere, Stanford Law School, Harvard, Princeton, politics, and so on. So half go on to further study in different disciplines. I think that's why I'm stressing this, is that you don't necessarily go into one discipline, but that you have a range of disciplines that you can then kind of move forward into. And the other half go into a variety of jobs. And it's been very interesting indeed to see where our students wind up. I mean, they wind up in NGOs, in government service, working for internet startups, quite a lot of them.
6 are at Google, I think, at the moment.
6 are at Google. In London alone, I think. We have this whole kind of gang.
Well, we're taking commission, I think, on this hiring strategy, but...
So that's where they work, and I think you said we have a very good career service, but I think our students also, because of the skills that they can offer, are pretty well placed in the job market, such as it is nowadays, just because of the skills and capabilities that they have.
We're a bit behind on time, I'm aware, so do you want to mention somewhat? No. Well, the only thing then that I would also just flag up is the funding issue, and we'll talk about this separately for DPhil in a minute. But for the master's perspective, we do have the one OII scholarship, which is allocated on the basis of academic excellence. You don't need to submit any extra materials. We'll judge that on the basis of your application. And that covers, it's 4 course fees, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. But it is also worth noting that each year, on average, we get at least 3 or 4 students funded through central sources of funding. Obviously, most specifically the Clarendon, which is the money that we have here from the Oxford University Press. It goes to fund a large number of scholarships each year. I chair the Social Science Division's Clarendon Committee. I see the sort of students that go through. Our department, thankfully, has been very competitive, but also things like sort of Dulverton. There are lots of these very small scholarships that maybe only fund 1 or 2 people per year, often of a specific nationality or disciplinary background. But again, you know, it's really worth making sure you've ticked all the relevant boxes, and you may well sort of, you know, find out yourself that you're uniquely relevant for this particular scholarship. So yeah, so don't be put off by the fact that we don't maybe have as much as say universities in the States. As Tess has already said, actually we do have more than most other universities in the UK, and we do particularly well here at the OII.
And I think it's worth saying that they're not just the Oxford ones, but again, often students come with, you know, a Canadian research funding body or a German one or a company-related sponsorship and so on. We get a lot of students who are funded in one way or another.
Alison, is there anything? Alison Michigan is one of our current MSc students, one of our great MSc students. Is there anything that you would add, either to give more colour to the course, Ralph's given a really sort of thorough description of it, or that you wish you'd known when you were applying?
I wish that I'd known how friendly and how interdisciplinary it actually is. So in terms of, I come from the States where I had tried to make an interdisciplinary program and actually design my own major in undergrad, but one of the things that I was really impressed about and that I really liked about the OII is it's actually interdisciplinary. So in terms of where I did my undergrad, I felt that I was able to kind of combine courses from a number of different disciplines, but people from different disciplines weren't willing to learn or work with each other to kind of apply the strengths of either multimodal research or just really kind of like engage in open scholarly debate. And one of the things that I really liked most about being a student at the OII is that all the professors are learning from each other and applying, not even though they're all trained in a certain discipline, they're kind of clearly influenced by what everyone else is doing, and that kind of spirit pervades throughout just the structure of the course. And so there are weekly brown bags that you can attend, and everyone will share their research, and you can kind of look at that, and you'll sit in the library and have a really interesting conversation with someone who might be studying economics, even if you're a psychologist, and then you kind of have a completely new view of your research, and everyone from the faculty down to the DPhils down to the master students is really open to learning from each other and very approachable, and I found it as like the most friendly and engaging place to do research that I've been. So I like it.
Well, can you get to write that down and sign that? But yeah, we are a fun place to be. It's not a phrase I ever thought I'd heard used in the academic department, but it is a fun place to be. Anyway, questions about the master's course? Anybody?
You know the modules we can take. And the website says not every module is going to be available. What's your experience in that? Are there every year enough students for each module to fill them up? Or?
So far, they've all been offered all the time.
Okay, that's good, I guess.
Or I think education actually hasn't been offered 1 year because we didn't have, or 2 years because we didn't have enough students for it. But by and large, and if there were a couple of students interested in it, we'd probably go out of our way to make it happen.
Yeah. And actually, it's also worth noting that our the number of applicants that we can accept is going up next year because our courses perform so well and been ranked so highly. So actually, given that student numbers will be higher from next year, my suspicion would be that all the courses are likely to be unusual if they didn't.
And also speaking to what I said earlier, so if there's a course that is not offered but might be something that you're interested in and that a professor has a background in, you're also able to meet with them and just kind of use them as a research sounding board. So for example, I'm interested in psychology and there's no internet psychology course, and there's a psychologist on staff who will give me papers to read, so you can kind of, if there's something that's not covered, or if I wanted to take a lot of option courses and unfortunately we're only allowed to take 2, if you want to take on board, you can kind of go off on your own.
Cool.
Are we supposed to know how to manage a Python or Stata?
Good question. We assume nothing. I mean, we assume that you're able to write well and to argue well, and that's kind of a baseline, and that you have some other skills that you bring to the course. But otherwise, there are no prerequisites for anything. In fact, for example, the Internet Economics course, which I mentioned earlier, he has a kind of pre-class for people to brush up on the maths that they need for the economics course, so that anyone can take the math course, the economics course.
And the same in statistics, actually. Yeah.
And the same in statistics. And so, we'll bring you up to speed in anything that you're not currently up to speed in.
It's also worth noting that as well as the teaching you have here in the OII, there are all sorts of other courses that are available to you throughout the university. So for example, if you're interested in learning programming, we may teach you a bit of Python here, but there will be other, longer courses, more detailed courses that you can take at the computing service, also language classes and so on and so on. So yeah, don't assume you have the knowledge, but obviously, good if you want to develop
And
it.
students are actually also a great resource for that, so we
Yeah.
kind of all pool together and have different backgrounds and have various study groups and ways of supporting each other through that, because I guarantee you will, if you don't know Stata, you will not be the only person struggling through learning that. And I think that the courses are actually really well structured so that, you're more likely to feel like you already know stuff and it's repetition than that your bases are not being covered. So I think that's one of the really big strengths of how the first term is structured. Like, I came in with no statistical background, but a large background in some of the core survey courses, and they really start every single thing from the ground, so that by the end, I've noticed that you're kind of at a level playing field, and it's great.
And what kind of time component is the teaching relative to kind of independent study? How's that kind of work out?
Well, I think during the Michaelmas and Hillary term, it's quite teaching intensive, but teaching intensive depends on how, what you're comparing it to. So, for example, social dynamics is roughly 2.5 hours per week. Same with technologies and regulation, so 4 hours of methods teaching. And so you probably spend about 10 to 12 hours just in teaching contact time, but of course, as Alison and others mentioned, you'll be meeting with your faculty and developing projects and so on. So
we calculated that we expect students to work between sort of 40-45 hours a week during the masters. It is an intense course, but on average, certainly in the first term, I think about a third of it is either class contact or contact with tutors of some sort.
And you can ask Alison afterwards.
Yeah, what the real answer is. Yeah.
The real answer is how many weekends she has just for fun and how many weekends
it is worth noting that you couldn't, for example, we wouldn't normally admit people, for example, who had other large commitments. If they're planning to continue to work, for example, it is a full-time course, so it's worth bearing in mind.
How are the early stages of the development of a thesis structured throughout the course? Does that only start with the Hillary term? Because you mentioned it might evolve under the impression of what we've learned in Michaelmas and Hillary. So where does it start exactly? Where does it work with the supervisors?
Oh, well, you're supposed to start right from day one. But I think what it is that you slowly get a sense of where you're going. What your strengths are, which skills you're wanting to develop, are there particular methodological approaches that you want to develop, do you want to refine your question, and so on. So I think it depends a bit on how proactive and how certain you are about your topic, but it's an ongoing process that starts right at the beginning. I think during Hillary, at a certain point, you actually have to submit a topic and a short paragraph. So in the middle of Hillary, we ask you to be ready with what you're wanting to do. You can revise it, but at that stage you should really have a very good idea.
I'm going to suggest we move on to talking about the DPhil. But if you have got questions that you haven't had a chance to ask yet, please don't worry, we will be available, just after. I'm just conscious that some people may have to go sort of shortly after 3.